Ready to explore the causes of the home ownership gap between Black and white Americans? In this video, I'll dive deep into the complex issue and discuss potential solutions to bridge the divide. Get ready to hear this insightful exploration of the facts and figures behind one of the most pressing topics of our time. Tune in now and join me on this journey to find ways to bring about real, lasting change. Hi, I'm Lorraine Blaylock Chavez, a licensed realtor in Pennsylvania. I'm the creator of the HomeBuyersAndInvestorsGuide.com, a place where people come to learn how to use real estate as a pathway to build generational wealth. Let's get started. What is the American dream? According to Investopedia.com, the American dream is the belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what class they were born into, can attain their own version of success in a society in which upward mobility is possible for everyone. The American dream is believed to be achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work rather than by chance. The term American Dream was coined in a best-selling book in 1931 titled Epic of America by James Truslow Adams. He described it as that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability and achievement. The American dream was to help the United States have a competitive edge over other countries. Even though the definition of the American dream has changed to mean different things to different generations, home ownership and education are still seen as paths to achieving the American dream. What are some of the reasons behind home ownership disparities faced by Black Americans? Home ownership is an important part of the American dream, but unfortunately, Black Americans are faced with significant disparities when it comes to owning a home, investing in real estate, and building generational wealth. This YouTube video or podcast will explore the reasons behind these disparities and discuss solutions for addressing them. From examining the economic conditions that make home ownership more difficult for Black Americans to looking at systemic racism in the housing market. This YouTube video or podcast will provide an overview of why Black Americans are not able to achieve home ownership in equal numbers as their white counterparts, specifically in the areas of Philadelphia and Delaware counties. These are the areas where I help people find and purchase real estate and help them achieve their goals of wealth building using real estate as the gateway. No doubt, this was and is a challenge for Black Americans throughout the United States. How did historical policies contribute to today's home ownership disparities? We know that home ownership is a cornerstone of the American dream, yet disparities in home ownership remain when it comes to Black Americans. This can be attributed to many historical policies that have had a lasting impact on today's housing market. From redlining to predatory lending practices, these policies have contributed to the inequality in home ownership opportunities that Blacks still experience today. Two of the major unfair policies that made it harder for Blacks to buy homes are higher interest rates and homeowners, also known as property insurance. This methodical system of discrimination towards Black American homebuyers made it harder and even prevented many from realizing the American dream. The federal government had to figure out ways to deal with the Great Depression in the 1930s. To help strengthen home ownership opportunities in the United States, the federal government created a Homeowners Loan Act in 1933, as well as the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The goal of these efforts were to assist a rating system known today as redlining. What is redlining? Redlining, which is the practice of basing access to capital and financial services on neighborhood characteristics such as race and ethnicity. This had destructive effects on older, non-white areas in Philadelphia, especially in areas of South, West, and Lower North Philadelphia. These areas formed a ring around downtown, also known as Center City. This means that banks and other lending institutions issued significantly fewer mortgages than in other parts of the city. The practice continued the cycle of disinvestment that damaged individual property owners and entire neighborhoods. The term redlining came about in the 1960s, although the practice of redlining dates back to the 1930s, and two federal housing agencies, known as the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration. Congress created the FHA in 1934. At the time, the housing industry was flat on its back. 2 million construction workers had lost their jobs. Terms were difficult to meet for homebuyers seeking mortgages. Homeowners Loan Corporation employed local real estate and finance experts to conduct systematic neighborhood appraisals in the 1930s and used the survey data to create residential security maps representing the perceived neighborhood's risk. The riskiest neighborhoods received a grade D and were colored red. The nature of Philadelphia as an industry city and the close proximity between factories and residential areas led to many neighborhoods receiving the lowest grade as high-risk areas. The Federal Housing Administration Mortgage Insurance Program based its underwriting guidelines on maps that coded as red those geographic areas were considered too risky to warrant mortgage lending. According to FHA underwriting manuals, the main characteristics elevating that risk were the age of housing and the race or ethnicity of residents. Those manuals, which included language that discouraged lending to homebuyers who would upset the racial character of a neighborhood, broadly influenced the underwriting standards adopted across the entire mortgage industry. Almost immediately, these practices reduced access to mortgages in older and non-white neighborhoods, particularly in North, South, and West Philadelphia. I grew up in North and West Philadelphia from 1960 to the mid-1970s. Redlining made it difficult for individuals to purchase homes, to borrow against the value of the homes they owned, or refinance. This practice affected whole neighborhoods, reducing black homeowners, lowering property values, which impacts the ability for black owners to pass on properties comparable to white homeowners, decreasing housing quality, and increasing racial segregation. Well, if you can't access credit and financing to make repairs and upgrades on your property, then the value will decrease in quality and value. Once again, the pathway to building wealth is deliberately riddled with roadblocks. The lack of access to mortgage capital often led to houses being converted into commercial properties and apartments that leads to a reduction in single-family residential properties. Redlining affects not only the inner circle of working class neighborhoods, but also what was called the streetcar suburbs of West and North Philadelphia. These were homes built along transit lines to house families who could afford to escape from the gritty industrial background of the economic structure. In the 1920s, the middle class was the cornerstone of the area, but then, after World War II, the streetcar suburbs experienced a mass exodus to automobile suburbs. Strawberry Mansion, for example, had developed in the late 1800s at the edge of Fairmount Park in North Philadelphia. Easy access by streetcar to downtown, along with amenities like Fairmount Park and Connie Mack Baseball Stadium, had drawn many families in the early 20th century, most notably a flourishing Jewish community. From the 1940s to the 1960s, after many white residents took advantage of FHA mortgage insurance for buyers of new suburban homes, Strawberry Mansion's population changed from 89% white and 11% black to 5% white and 95% black. Because Strawberry Mansion was redlined, sellers had fewer and less generous offers from buyers, triggering a decline that continues for decades. I actually grew up on one block away from 33rd and Burke Street. 33rd Street runs from the length of Lehigh Avenue to Girard Avenue along Fairmount Park. The other side of the street was and still is lined with huge 3-story brownstones. I remember playing in the park, running up and down the tree-filled hills, and being warned not to go near the reservoir, which was unfenced at the time. The same thing happened in the Mill Creek section of Philadelphia on the north side of Market Street between 44th and 52nd Streets. I lived in this area also during the late 60s to the early 70s. This community was named for a creek that was buried in the 19th century. Mill Creek had been developed after 1880 as a streetcar suburb served by 2 commercial thoroughfares, Lancaster and Haverford Avenues. This was a community where Dick Clark broadcasted American Bandstand, and I also attended roller derby games at 46th and Market Streets. Another community where redlining was undermining the housing stock and fueling out migration to the suburbs, mainly by whites. In 1950, the population of Mill Creek was about 1/4 white and 3/4 black. By 1970, white residents made up only 4% of the population in the Mill Creek community. Regional housing activists fought back against the damaging effects of discrimination in access to housing and credit. In Delaware County, as early as 1956, civil rights activist Margaret Collins established Fringe Suburban Housing, Inc. in response to unequal access to home ownership. The organization subsequently merged with other groups and changed its name to the Housing Equality Center while expanding its geographic focus to encompass all the Pennsylvania counties of Greater Philadelphia and targeting housing discrimination based on race, disability, and age. By the mid-1970s, the mutually reinforcing trends of population loss and disinvestment had created levels of vacancy and abandonment that the city had. I remember hearing some Black American family and church members talking about being the first Black family to move on their block. In fact, I remember the last white family that lived on our block. They were next door neighbors to my grandparents, where I also lived in the Strawberry Mansion area in the 1960s. Now I better understand what was happening. I could not understand the white neighbor who was moving. I could not understand why the white neighbor was moving when everybody seemed to get along on Natrona Street. A nationwide problem. Not just a Philadelphia problem, redlining continued to be widespread across the United States after the Fair Housing Act of 1968 made it illegal. Congress enacted two acts in the mid-1970s. Community Reinvestment Act, which was enacted in 1977, requires the Federal Reserve and other federal banking regulators to encourage financial institutions to help meet the credit needs of the communities in which they do business, including low and moderate income neighborhoods. And the other is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, HMDA, which requires many financial institutions to maintain, report, and publicly disclose loan-level information about mortgages. This information is gathered from the loan application. Subprime lending. A different yet also damaging form of discrimination emerged in the mid-1990s. Rather than denying credit, some lenders targeted inner-city neighborhoods to offer mortgages to low-income and minority borrowers at far less favorable terms than were applied to conventional loans. Marketed intensively in inner-city neighborhoods, these subprime loans hid in fine print the dramatic escalation in monthly payments after the first 2 or 3 years of the loan period. They were called adjustable rate mortgages, also known as ARM. Many lenders sold such loans to the same kinds of low-income and minority home buyers they had previously shunned. The ballooning payments built into these loans drove thousands of borrowers into default and foreclosure on their homes. Another mortgage product was stated income. Some lenders had sold a disproportionate share of subprime loans in minority communities. Those neighborhoods suffered unusually high foreclosures and multiplying vacancies. In a society where home ownership often served as the most common route to building wealth, the denial of mortgage loans and the predatory use of subprime credit inflicted substantial damage on families, especially in minority communities. They contributed to widening wealth gaps in the second half of the 20th century that profoundly influenced many Philadelphians' life chances. I was actually a mortgage broker during the mid-1990s. One thing I do know is that mortgage company account execs wanted me to charge my clients more on points on the back end. I would not do it because it would increase my client's interest rate with their knowledge, of course. As a mortgage broker, disclosure had to take place if points were added on the back end to the rate, but mortgage bankers didn't have to disclose that information. What are some current barriers that prevent Black Americans from achieving home ownership? Now in 2023, it seems that the dream of home ownership still continues to be an important part of the American dream. Yet, for Black Americans, it can be a difficult goal to achieve. I mean, we're talking at least 90 years later. Despite progress in recent years, there are still significant barriers that prevent Black Americans from achieving home ownership. It's the same old list of economic inequality, racial discrimination in the housing market, and systemic racism in the banking system. All of these factors contribute to a lack of access to credit and capital for Black Americans, making it difficult for them to purchase a home. By understanding these barriers and taking steps to address them, we can begin to create more equitable access to home ownership for Black Americans. Home ownership statistics by race show that the highest rates of home ownership are held by white households. Although home ownership rates for both Asian and Hispanic homeowners are above or around 50% respectively, the rate for Black home ownership remains lower at just above 43%. What has been the impact of current and proposed programs to help address home ownership disparities? As already noted, home ownership is a fundamental part of the American dream, yet disparities in home ownership rates remain amongst different racial and ethnic groups. Current and proposed programs have been created to help address this issue, but what impact do they have? Let's explore the impact of existing and proposed programs for home ownership disparities, including the use of incentives to encourage home buying, the role of government-backed mortgage programs, and other measures that can be taken to increase access to home ownership for Black Americans. So what measure can be tailored to address specific challenges faced by Black Americans and minority communities? There are current initiatives as well as potential solutions for the future. To name a few, FHA mortgages. This seems odd because we are now aware of the role that FHA played in Black Americans not getting mortgages or getting higher rates and lower property values. Also, first-time home buyer programs, home buyer counseling, grants from community organizations or churches or nonprofit organizations, and also gifts from family members. In conclusion, what can we do to reduce home ownership disparities for Black Americans? Home ownership has long been seen as an important step in achieving the American dream, but for many Black Americans, this dream is out of reach. The disparities in home ownership between Black Americans and white Americans have been increasing over the last few decades, leaving many Black Americans behind in terms of economic security and wealth accumulation. To combat this growing problem, we must look at ways to reduce these disparities by providing more access to affordable housing options and financial education resources. This includes creating incentives for lenders to provide loans to Black American applicants at lower interest rates, expanding access to government-backed mortgage programs such as FHA loans, and providing educational resources on financial literacy and home ownership. By making these changes, we can help close the gap between Black Americans and white Americans when it comes to home ownership. I love to see your comments and questions in the chat about barriers to Black Americans and people of color achieving the American dream through home ownership. I'll put a link below where you can get a free copy of Top 14 Things That a First-Time Home Buyer Should Know. Also, please post in the comments any experiences that you've had in preparing to build generational wealth through home ownership. Don't forget to post any questions you may have about preparing to buy your first home as well. So I'd appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel and tap that bell for more content related to using real estate for wealth generation. Please like this video and don't forget to click the link below to get your free copy of the top 14 things that a first-time home buyer should know.